and welcome to Politics 101 on a Thursday, our Thursday edition. Wherever you are joining us from, we would like to welcome you. Our special edition tonight, our open word edition, our first one for the year. Professor Clive Thomas is here, and we are going to be touching on a number of issues. I would like to welcome all you wonderful people to the program and to thank you again. Thank you again for continuing to support us and continuing to stay with us because we are on this journey. We are on this journey. Good evening to all of you joining us from inside of Guyana, all of you on the East Coast. I usually forget the East Coast people because we take it for granted. You're always there. That's the part of the country that I know best and that I'm from, and I have this habit of taking it for granted that I'm always mentioning you. Good evening to you, the people from Mahaika, all the various parts of Mahaika, Jonestown, Unity, etc., etc. The people coming down Combrook, Beehive, Ants Grove, coming through to Belfield, Victoria. Good evening to the people of Victoria. I know a number of you are usually on this program. Victoria is a farming community. I was quite surprised a couple of years ago when we went to Victoria and we were told by the farmers there that they produce so much food that they have to dump. They produce so much cassava, for example. There's no market for the cassava. And we went to the back there and saw a lot of farming going on. The back and the sides of Victoria, a lot of farming going on there. And it's not usually known because people say, farming is dead in the villages. And perhaps we'll talk to Dr. Thomas about this phenomenon for a minute. It's not on our schedule to speak about, but I was stunned that the volume of cash crop farming that's going on in Victoria, and there was no market, and they were trying to engage the minister or ministers during the period of the coalition. That village is quite an interesting village. I mean, there are three roads: the main road, and then you have the two sidelines, and it's a deep village. Victoria, like Ants Grove and Pleasance, they're very deep villages. Once you leave the road, by the time you click your finger, you're at the line top, or what we call the railway embankment. And from the railway embankment down to the backlands, I mean, it's very, very, very deep. And they have three roads. And one road is fairly good, but the two sideline dams were in terrible shape. I mean, you could barely walk on them. Cars don't drive on them. Taxis wouldn't go there to collect people. If people die at home, they have to fetch the bodies out to the good road because the horses wouldn't go there. It was a terrible way to live, and we were able to walk both sideline dams, and we spoke with villagers there and tried to mobilize them. We got the regional chairman involved. We got the deputy regional chairman involved, and they met with the people. But I don't think much has been done, and I have to check with Brother Kedaki because he initiated the whole issue by going into Victoria and really seeing bad roads. But it's a village that is near and dear to my heart. Of course, it must be. It's the first village, and tremendous history there. And it's good to see people continue to engage in farming at the level that they have, and they continue to produce a lot of casserip and cassava bread coming out of that village, Victoria. I was back there last year when a visiting team from University of California came to the University of Guyana, And after they passed through Buxton, I accompanied the team to Victoria. And we spent some time in Victoria North. It's not an area of Victoria that I get to go often. And it was nice talking to people there. This was, I think, in August. And it was nice talking to people there one-on-one. People recognize us and stop to talk to me. And it was interesting that the conversation was not about party politics and all of that. The conversation was about African culture and African dignity and so on. It's refreshing to hear young people, because a lot of young people, young men in particular, who stopped me and they were talking about African culture. A lot of them are young Rastafarians, and they were talking about Rastafarian history and urging me to continue to spend time on that subject. So good evening to all of you in Victoria area. Good evening, Nabaklis, Haslington, Victoria, Golden Grove, another village that I spent a lot of time in the last 2 years in. Wonderful people. The Quindon Bacchus incident took us in there, and we spent a lot of time there. I understand there's some issues in the Haslington housing scheme, drainage issues and so on. Brother Kidaki is on to those issues. A lot of people are packed in, as you know, in the Haslington scheme. It's a new scheme. It's a nice scheme. People have some nice houses there and so on. But there seemed to be a problem with drainage at the back there. And I know Kidaki has been visiting those communities. But a wonderful good evening to people in that area. Robin Simon, the live wire in that village, he runs a daycare center which is serving not just Golden Grove, Nabaklis, and Haslington, but I heard from parents as far as Bachelor's Adventure, Paradise, who take their children to that daycare, and people from as far as Victoria. So it's serving the villages in that part of the East Coast. Good evening, Robin. We haven't had her in the program in recent times, but we are going to make up for that as we go along. Good evening to the people of Paradise, Bachelor's Adventure, Enterprise Front, Enterprise Back, Beirut. Wonderful good evening to the people at Hope. Good evening to you. Strathspey, Vigilance, coming right through to my area, Friendship, Buxton, Annandale, as we say. Good people of Lusignan and Better for Wacton, Triumph, LBI, and LBI now is quite extended with the new schemes that are there. Wonderful good evening to you people. Success coming right through to Better Hope and Pleasance, Good for Wacton. All you people in Pleasance, welcome to our program. Good evening, Georgetown. We often take it for granted that Georgetown is there, and I would like to say thanks to you and Happy New Year to all of you in Guyana, the people in the wider Caribbean, our Caribbean, which is very much part of our conversation. A very good evening to you. It's Thursday. Would you believe it? We're almost to the end of the second week of the month, the second week of the year. You wouldn't believe just the other day we were talking Christmas and New Year's. I mean, the world moves at such a pace these days, technology and all of that stuff. By the time you say, what we used to say in the old days, Jack Robinson, the week done, it's really moving. I think it had to do with that, those 3 years or so that we lost during the pandemic that's in a sense slowed the world down. I find myself having sometimes to remember those years. It's as if they're not part of the consciousness in the same way as other years were. But good evening to you in the Caribbean. And those of you in North America, wonderful people in New York and Maryland and down there in the South Carolina and Georgia and Texas and people where I hang out, and I don't remember them, and they cuss me whenever they see me. Don't see me much these days because I don't get around as I used to. I'm talking about people in Arizona, Guyanese in Arizona. They have a group called Guyanese in Arizona, and it's quite one of these days. We have to talk about the Guyanese in Arizona. Quite a closely knit community, and we had something to do in bringing that community together and so forth. So good evening, good afternoon, because it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. There it's 7 o'clock in Guyana. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Good evening. And those of you who are joining us from California, a place where I lived for 3 years. Oh, that's a world by itself. 3 of my best years were spent when I lived in California. I worked there at one of the universities and lived there. California, if you think New York is a world by itself, California is something else. And we have a sizable Guyanese community there. I know they get together at Easter time. And they have a little thing there and so on. Most of them are in Southern California. Rancho Cucamonga and Pomona, etc., that area. But a lot of them are in Rancho Cucamonga, which is about an hour south of LA. And we have a sizable community also in San Diego, which is much south on the border with Mexico. And good evening to you in San Diego. A couple of you contacted me recently and said I always forget San Diego. And no, I will not. So Canada, those of you there, good evening. And of course, our friends in Europe, particularly in the United Kingdom. Is almost midnight there. Good night to you and the sacrifice you make for staying up this late to be with our program and all the other programs. And our friends in France, good night to you also. And those of you in other parts of the world that I have not mentioned, of course, we are not forgetting our people in Suriname and French Guyana, as we say, Paramaribo and Cayenne, not forgetting you all there, because you all are very much part of us. Welcome. Well, tonight we're going to talk with Professor Clive Thomas, the first time for the year, and we're going to be touching on a number of topical issues to get Professor Thomas's take on it. As you know, you all know I've been talking in recent times about the Buxton proposal, or what you all know more as cash transfers. And I've been talking about that proposal as a very important plan going forward. There is all the talk now about election, although the government has said that it's going to be sometime late next year. Nevertheless, people have to begin to put their houses in order and to begin to talk about, especially the opposition, about what it is that we are putting before you. When you're in opposition, you can't come and say, look, we are building this road, we are building this bridge, we are doing this. We have to be able to put before you an alternative vision of the society first, alternative vision, and then policies, macro policies, micro policies that are consistent with that vision, And we are at a particular time in our history, because we are now we are now making the transition to a petrol state. And that means a lot. It means that the society is going through changes. And when you're making that transition, you then have to adjust your vision to suit that transition, and then policies that come with that transition. Because the transition to petrol state is not just economic, it has political ramifications, as we have already seen, a la Venezuela. It has global manifestations because we are selling oil. We are selling oil to a world that depends a lot on oil and gas. The gas thing is coming along, but oil, petroleum. So our country is really going through its own changes. And as Professor Thomas once said on this program, there are changes that will happen without direct government intervention. Where the government comes in is whether it manages that change in an effective way, whether it speeds up that change, or the government itself, by its policies and its vision, can retard those changes. And as you all know, we on this program, we in the Working People's Alliance, we have taken the view that we are not going to deny that there are changes happening in Guyana, because we are not in the business of confusing or conflating our critique and criticisms of the government with a denial that things are happening in a country whose GDP has risen tremendously. We can't avoid that. We can't deny that. And so we start off by acknowledging that. And we feel that when we acknowledge that fact, we are on stronger ground when it comes to be critical of the government managing those changes. So here we are. That's my little mouthful to get you all situated and ready for our talk tonight. Let's bring in Professor Thomas. Professor, good evening. Sorry to keep you waiting.
No, you haven't kept me waiting. I was enjoying your reminiscences.
Thank you very much.
Reminded me of the days I spent in those parts of the world.
Yes.
I enjoyed it, yeah.
Yes. And when we were in Victoria a couple of years ago, and the people there showed me that they were doing so much farming there, and they didn't have markets, and they had to give away or waste food. And I thought of you, because I tell the story all the time, that as a boy, a schoolboy first, and then a young man in the 70s in the village, and the WPA would come into the village to hold meetings. We younger people, we were fascinated with Walter Rodney, and he had just come back, and he was this international star and revolutionary and so on, and we were that, but we were always curious that when you came to speak, the older people, especially the farmers, would come out from the backlands.
You've often said that. You've often said that to me.
Yeah. And we couldn't understand. They would come out early. They would come to the line top. Meetings would start at 6 in those days, and they would be there from 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And we didn't realize, and they would be told, Clive Thomas, come in. It is much later that I realized that you were talking about farming, and you were talking about sugar, and that was, those things were their lives. They're in a sense connected with what you were saying primarily. Not that they didn't want to hear Rodney and the others, but what you were saying had a direct effect on their livelihood. And so when we went into Victoria, I thought about you, that here we were talking about the village economy declining and so on. Where's the village that they were producing surplus food? Any reflections on that?
Yes, I remember. I don't know if you do, that you were chairing the meeting. The last meeting we held at the Critchlow Labor College, there was a gentleman there who I think was an organizer for the agricultural department. He's a keen agriculturalist.
Yes.
And I could remember him almost in tears making the point that he agrees with the Boxer proposal. Because if you think of it, since they were dealing in units of 100 households, if each of those households got about $1 million per year, that put into the local, very, very local economy a lot of spending power that would change the lives and the fortunes and the prospects of those people that's in those particular communities. 100 households having $100 million to collectively spend on things that they might consider important for the village. And having it in every house, every part of the country, every region, every 100 households would have got that. It would have been a way of infusing cash, income, enterprise, and drive into the entire economy of Guyana, spread all across every region, than anything that we could have thought of as a central planning unit. And I could remember him, and that's why I also keep that at the back of my mind. He was almost in tears in his agreement with me.
Yes, I remember.
Yeah.
I remember.
And he was an East Indian farmer.
That's right.
East Indian specialist. Yeah.
Yeah. But are you surprised that in a place like Victoria, they're still producing so much food?
No, I think the cash economy of that level has a lot of way to go.
Mm-hmm.
What we need more is technology, a lot more science applied to it, a lot more modernized approaches to agriculture, a lot more education and skills. We need to get the younger people involved in it too, where they could bring some education and business skills to the ventures. I think the opportunities for Guyana to be a very successful producer of food are remarkable. You know where you see that best? When you look at our inflation rate. For a country that now being advertised, you probably saw it, as the 10th fastest growing country in the world. In the recent IMF publications, they listed the 10 top countries. Guyana is number 10, US is number 9. Could you believe
it? Yes.
And when you see that, you get to understand how much potential there is there for us. We need to recognize it, and we shouldn't play cat and mouse with it. Deny it for political reasons, deny it just to criticize the government. We should acknowledge it because the Guyanese gain for all Guyanese. And we want to maximize the opportunities that we get with that. So we should keep the drive on. I know some of my comrades don't always take that view. They feel that we should not say things that might endear themselves today or allow the government to appropriate. But politics is not about that. Politics is about improving the lives of people, improving their circumstances. They will recognize where the drive is coming from and what is propelling it. We don't have to spoon feed them.
That thin line, Professor Thomas, between acknowledging that there is potential for change at the level of the individual, the level of the family, the level of the community, and of course, finally, the level of the country. That thin line between that acknowledgement of that potential, and our political duty to keep the government on its toes and to expose the government where it's going wrong. How you navigate that thin line? Because I think
we have to first of all recognize it as a moral duty. I mean, certainly myself as a scholar, I will never propagate lies, no matter who would ask me to do it. So there's no political party can get me to lie. I will speak the truth as I see it, and if they're comfortable with it, I join some other party. Because you have to navigate the morality of the case. And the case is that if those on the left who argue for progressive policies are correct, they don't have to go to get into subterfuges to prove it is correct. So I think that the moral case has got to be the leading case. That is why I get so upset sometimes with what happens in the rest of the world. I was very proud today about what South Africa did, and I'm in one of my better moods today. But that is a point of morality that they owe and the duty they owe to the rest of the world. My feeling and understanding of what they're doing, that buoys my sense of humanity. It adds more value to me and to millions and millions of people around the world than trying to play cat and mouse with the Israelis. The
And,
courage to stand up and say that in the face of all the condemnation they bring. That is what makes the difference, and people know it. They
and
know
since you've gone there, Professor, let me just jump in. Since you've gone there, when you mentioned South Africa, you were talking about the case that the South Africans have,
today. I listened to it mostly today. Yeah.
yes, that they've brought to the World Court against Israelis for alleged genocide in Gaza, and at the hearing started today at the World Court, and YouTube. Those of you who were following it, it's been
I think
on
most of your listeners would be following it.
following it.
I'm
So,
absolutely convinced of that.
yes, so Professor, continue. What's the case? What is South Africa arguing, and why is that case important?
The case is important not because we expect Israel to be responsive to whatever judgment is made, but because we expect that any judgment that is made would add pressure on Israel and force a political change on them or the United States and or the United States. I mean, the Biden administration advertises itself as the leader of democracy, as the engine of democracy in the rest of the world. Put them to the test. And if the World Court, I think, made a decision that they should halt or cease action until the case is heard, that whether or not they disobey it or obey it would have a tremendous impact on what follows from now. It will prevent a lot of killing because it can be very, very hard. They will do it. I'm not saying the Israelis will respond to the World Court ruling, but they've never done it in the past. But it can make it very difficult in that environment to continue in what is an obvious genocide.
An
Yes.
obvious genocide.
Obvious to me because there are many, many families now in Palestine who can never continue after this generation because all the people of childbearing age or all who can procreate, all who can generate an infant have all been killed. That's the reality of life. They've already started it. And to take on 1% of the population with such a heavy concentration on children and women, pregnant women included, with stillborn, with babies not yet born, is to end the bloodline of that particular family. Because there's an entire family they go after in those buildings. You know, they live like clans. 16, 20, 20 of them, you own a building. And if you can kill all the younger people, you end that bloodline. And that is what the South Africans has documented. That's what we've been saying all the time. That is why it is a morality crisis. But human beings should not do that to others. And we should not let them get away. I'm glad that the South Africans that had the moral courage, but I think they owe us the responsibility to do it. But we all put in something for their fight for against apartheid.
Professor Clive Thomas here, commenting on the South African case before the World Court regarding the genocide in Gaza, and making the very important point that this is much more than just naked politics. It's a moral moral question that has implications for the continuation of families and clans and so
And
forth.
it ends certain bloodlines. Could you imagine that? Think about it when after the program. There's some families now that have disappeared off the earth forever because every person of childbearing age have been killed. And that is what they're setting about to do. You have to know a little bit of the demography of these things. And that is what they're doing slyly because I don't know why they're so sly about it. Almost many of the ministers come out and make horrendous speeches about how they will wipe them off the face of the earth and so on. But that is what they're trying to do. Eliminate certain bloodlines. The calculated assault on the next generation or any generation to come out of Palestine.
Out of Palestine, and certainly that situation there is as dread as it can be, and the world is perhaps slow in recognizing the depth of that tragedy in that part of the world, perhaps because we have become so tired over the decades with that issue. It has never gone away. And perhaps because we are seeing it through the prism of other countries like the United States and inundated with the media in the even the media in the United States, Professor Clive Thomas, we are seeing some slight changes there in certain sections of the US.
But why it's important to me personally is that the first thing that I ever learned about Europe and about Israel and the Holocaust and all that was that Guyana nearly became the home place for the Israelis. So I've always felt that the kinship of their struggles, the struggles in South Africa, which I always felt because of my race and color, and that they were part of my being. So I could not differentiate between them because it's only by accident of history. And maybe some people say not even history because they Israelis didn't want to live far from Europe. So it was preordained.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yep. That important tidbits there on the large reach of that situation there in Gaza. Professor, let's come back to Guyana and come back to the Buxton proposal, the cash transfer. And I want you to do some economics 101 for us. What is the difference between the Buxton proposal of cash transfers and these handouts that the government is calling cash grants? What is the difference?
First of all, the difference is one of size. Many handouts are sporadic payments, and they're given in a way in which you give enough to satisfy the particular need of the person at the current point in time. The cash transfers that we are talking about are systematic, they're longer term, they last until the person gets out of poverty. So in that sense, that's systematic income you can look forward to until you move yourself out of poverty. And in that sense, it also becomes a right or condition under which you live as a citizen to participate in the society. So it becomes an obligation of the state, an obligation of the society to you and to all others. And you also have to have reciprocal obligation. And those obligations are primarily to pay your taxes, to spend the money wisely, but we're not telling you how to spend it, but we figure that you are sensible enough to know that you're the best person to decide on what your priorities are and not have a bureaucrat tell you what it is. We're therefore likely to waste more money by doing the process that way. We're likely to have an optimal use or close to an optimal use of the effectiveness of the aid that we give and that we allow each citizen to entitle an entitlement to than if we just give them a handout. So in those ways, we figure that we turned it into a more efficient instrument of social protection than a government going from village to village and being asked and pressed by individual communities to give them something. Then the government turns around and feel that they've given them something, so they must get something back from them. It becomes a patron recipient relation, but it was socially structured relation. The opportunities for that type of abuse no longer exist. And people just see it as part of the entitlements of life, as part of the responsibilities of living in this particular community. So the opportunities for misusing it or playing politics with it disappear. As we can see now, look at the way in which the public income they gave out to the
Public servants.
well, yeah, I was about to say, I was about to suggest if we look back further from when they first came to
Yes.
when they first came to power.
Sugar workers.
Yeah, the sugar workers were given 250,000, and we had a big uproar about that because they were given that on top of the fact I was chairman of the sugar industry. He gave them all the entitlements they were entitled to by law. And the government came in and gave them that. And when they come now later on, a year or two later, they don't even want to negotiate with the union, the GPSU. It's so much a painful relationship that they feel the GPSU, the union, is anti-government. So they don't have their interests at heart. It's not a professional relationship. So they don't care. They snub the nose at them. They call them ignorant and ignorant and all that. So the relationship is never a fruitful one. The people who get the income fight for it day and night. We faced that attitude when we were the Armstrong tribunal, or the Armstrong and myself, and we had to make a decision about the wage award, which was considered at that time in the region of about 30%, 35%. Was considered at that time as astronomical. If we are now 3 years after oil being listed by the IMF figures as being number 10 among the richest countries in the world, how can we give out an income payment to the workers within the public sector of only 6.5% when the income of the community, the income rate of growth is in the region of 40 or 50%? It's ridiculous. There's no incomes policy. When they call for it, they deny them any consideration. They don't want to maybe plan something because the demand is getting the system. Many people are buying into our position that you have to treat the public servants as professionals. Their union is entitled to play a role in the process of wage and income policy. And they are not given it by the government. That is the entitlement in any democratic society. They have to evolve as partners in the process of determining the movement of wages. And we are trying to reinforce that by making the income streams include the universal basic income payment. That is what we try to do.
That is what we try to do. Professor, one of the criticisms of the government handouts is, as you pointed out there is no equitability about them. They go to one community, they give this. They go to another community, they give that. They give the sugar workers $250,000. They give the public servants 6.5% of $100,000, and so on and so forth. How do you correct that in your proposal of cash transfer? How do you correct that inequity in the distribution?
Well, first of all, I in the Foxham proposal, we call it for us an amount sufficient to take everybody out of poverty eventually. That is the first and I think most important target that we set ourselves. Secondly, we're trying to streamline it by law so that nobody has to go to any politicians and ask for it as if they're asking for a gift. Thirdly, remove the opportunities of the government to play with the figures, to do as it did in this case, 250,000 to the civil workers, plus full payment under the law of all their entitlements, full and unequivocal satisfaction of that at every level. We never quibble about the cent. And yet we turn around and don't give the other employees pay. And there are only 54,000 employees. The state may look big and powerful with 54,000 employees in the public service.
54,000.
Yeah.
From the naked eye, it looks like more than that.
They look like everybody.
Yes.
And that's why I call them the employed poor. God, the government treats them as a bunch of beggars that they pay.
Yes, yes.
Total disrespect.
Yes, yes, yes. So is the universality of the Buxton proposal?
That is it.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
fraction of it, yeah.
Is each household gets the same amount?
Yeah, yeah. And you pay tax on it.
And you pay tax on it, right?
So if your household was getting before income enough to qualify for pay taxes, you still pay taxes on that.
Mm-hmm.
You follow, you may be in a household where you don't have to pay taxes.
Right,
Because
right.
at the bottom, you don't not receiving the basic income. So you don't pay that part of it in taxes at all.
In taxes. And for those households that are
Well, like mine, I
Right.
didn't get any income now. But when I was working, we were getting more than the minimum pay, more than the tax threshold. I would have to pay tax on it.
That's right. So that criticism that there are people who don't need it that are going to get it under the Buxton proposal.
You pay back in tax.
Taxes.
And you
pay
keep the
back.
tax structure progressive.
That's right.
That is, people with higher incomes pay more tax than those at lower income.
Mhm.
So they had complementary features like that.
Right. Professor, I know you're working right now on the Buxton proposal and updating it, as any good policymaker, any good scholar would do. You first made the proposal in 2018. It's 5 years, and you are updating it because we have changed since then. We've had first oil, and some would argue second oil and third oil since then.
I've been writing on it for quite a lot.
Right. What are
a good friend and colleague of yours and mine has asked me to do an essay on the Lenin's birthday. So what I suggested I'll do is one of the topics which I have to complete. I'm looking at 4 drivers and 4 and their impacts
Mhm.
and their metrics in terms of evaluating the proposal. One is the size of the resources and reserves that we have, which is what I'm about to finish. The second one is about the oil opportunity. That is, how long can we confidently or fairly confidently predict that the opportunities for exporting crude oil will remain basically competitive. It won't be regulated away because of climate transition. That's the one that I'm about to finish. I'm nearly finished. I'll finish that tomorrow.
Mhm.
And the third one is government take. So I thought that I'll expand that to consider this issue of ring fencing. I've written so much on it before, but many people don't even look as if they ever read the articles. Back in 2017, I called it ring fencing, another trade-off, trying to tell people that there's no one size fits all with ring fencing. That even the National Governance Resource Center for Oil and Gas recommended be very careful in the application of ring fencing. It is not an automatic yes. You have to look at the pros and cons, and I devoted a couple of articles to exploring that and bringing it to the guidance public, because back in 2018 there was a lot of debate about it. I see it back in the press again.
It is back on today, and I know we have talked on this program about ring fencing, but refresh our memory. Where do you stand on ring fencing as we speak? I know the argument is posed in a way that you may not be comfortable with, because it posed in a way ring fencing is either bad or it's good. And if I know you well, you don't premise your analysis.
That's what I said about the National Resource Governance recommendation,
Yeah.
which is what I published back in 2018. That's 6 years ago. I've been reading it, and I was surprised at how much sense I put into it.
Hmm.
I mean, it's really calling for a more systematic evaluation of the pros and cons.
Of ring fencing, that there are instances in which it could be beneficial, but there are other instances in which it may not be beneficial.
Yeah, and then the basic understanding of it is that you can't tax is not free income. If companies don't pay taxes out of manna from heaven, they pay taxes out of the revenues they generate. So if you get more taxes out of a company, it must affect something. It must affect something. So you can't just look at it and say, get more revenue. What is it likely to affect? Ask that question.
Hmm.
And then you'll know what ring fencing costs. And that's why it's probably nice to tie it up with a look at government take. Because these people still look at the government take as if the government can take income because it's called government take. I mean, the companies can give it because they have money from heaven and it's a costless exercise to them. But the ABC of every economic transaction like that is that taxation is the government compulsory acquisition of income from companies and individuals. So the effect of that must go into any evaluation of whether it's worthwhile. So we know a priori that it will, at the minimum, disincentivize investment. We know it's bound to do that because if you're getting less profit out of an activity, you have to try and cut back on the activity. If or go to an activity that gives you more profit. And it's in that choice, therefore, you find out whether or not ring fencing is the best way to go. But the government can't get ring fencing income and add it to its revenue resources and nothing happens.
Hmm.
Because to do that or to assume that is to assume what I thought was a settled matter 8 years ago. Assume that you get a manna from heaven, but there's no free income for anybody to get.
Professor, let me slow you down here for people like myself who are not trained economists. You're saying you have two variables here. You have income coming from ring fencing, and then you have income coming from taxes. And
Ring fencing is part of the tax income.
part of the tax system, right?
That form to generate income
Right,
out
right,
of the
right.
activities they do. And this one is selling oil.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Every tax on it takes away some of that income.
Right.
That income, once it's taken away, because it's not money that the firm is getting from God,
Right.
once it's taken away, it gives the firm is left with less income.
Less income.
So you must evaluate the effect of that less income on the firm's behavior
Behavior.
to be able to
Right.
measure or evaluate the consequences of it.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
If the firm continues to act as if it doesn't matter, then it means that the profits that they were getting were so super that it doesn't really matter whether or not they have to pay it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that really happens.
Right.
Because firms are by law compelled to earn maximum profits for their shareholders.
Mm.
Firms do not operate in a legal vacuum. A firm can't just go to the shareholders or go to the Securities Council or go to the court and say, we just like the politicians, so we give them the income. A firm it becomes a firm under a legal charter that makes it necessary for them to give their returns, maximize the returns for the people who own the firm, because the people who are running the firm do not necessarily own it.
Right, right. So Professor, again for economics 101 for relay people, they isn't ring fencing about whether you get the money now or you get it later?
Yeah, because eventually, this is also part of it.
And if you get it later, as the argument seems to be in the public domain, that if you get the money later, you're going to get less money. Is that necessarily
Not
true?
that you get less money, but later means that the money is likely to depreciate in value.
Right,
Because income up front is always more valuable than income later on,
right.
just because of the rise of prices over time and the discounting factor that every country, every form, every enterprise applies once you're
So,
dealing with cash.
so how you control for that?
But you have to evaluate what you think the firm will do.
I got you, got you, got you,
So I'm
got you.
saying one the good thing, I don't want to say the good thing because I don't want it to look as if I'm singing any place. But one of the things that a PSA like ours does is that it incentivizes investment in exploration and development. It incentivizes.
Uh-huh.
And to show you how much that is, if you take all the firms' returns and list them in a schedule from around the world, the annual loss falls somewhere in the middle range. So it is just by good fortune because I don't know if we set about to do that. I honestly don't know. By good fortune, we happen to land in a sweet spot where we collect enough income, but we also are trying to increase the income we collect. So we have to be able to calculate how much we disincentivize the generation of that income that we can get by raising the tax.
By raising the tax.
How much more we get by lowering the tax.
Yeah.
If we were, for example, to apply what many people may call ideal to them, because that's how they think, the US tax system, the Ghana, the yield, the profits going to the government will be only 40%, as many firm companies have and economists have already done. The return we get out of a US contract arrangement is 40%. Here we get 52%.
Professor,
and that keeps us in that middle range.
Yeah. Professor Clive Thomas. Professor, I want to get in two things quickly before we go. The first thing is the Argyle Agreement. When we last spoke, it was just in the wake of that agreement. The Working People's Alliance, your party, came out very strongly against first of all, the process, the agreement itself, and of course the interlocutors we were arguing were not necessarily the best that we could have had in the process. Since then, we have had a couple of developments. We've had the British warship making a visit to Guyana, and the Venezuelans responded by massing troops on the border, saying it's a violation of the Argyle Declaration. And then the Prime Minister of St. Vincent, it was found that St. Vincent and the Grenadines, it was found that he had taken a picture against the backdrop of a Venezuela map that included Essequibo. What lessons are we to learn from those two developments?
I think one lesson which is most important is that I think you were correct in the recommendations that we made. We had also, in making that recommendation, associated the fact that Mr. Gonzalez attempted to be an interlocutor on the matter when he had received the relief of some debt payments from the Venezuelan Petrocaribe. Now, that relief was given in, I think, 2022. And one of our comrades wrote to you, suggesting we should not hold it against him.
Yes,
I think because they see it, because they saw it as separated from what happened in 2023. But every time the press reports it, in any part of the region, they put the two things together. And I
Yes.
think one of the reasons is that the Petro Caribbean relief is a phased relief. So it's still operating now as we speak currently. So the reference rate is not altogether aimed at downplaying or embarrassing Gonzalez. It's obviously correct observation to make. The other thing that I think that's immortally important is that some people now feel that Gonzalez has discredited himself given the second incident with the photograph on the map from being an interlocutor in the matter. And Guyana had the consequence entered into some tricky waters because after having gone to the meeting, we now find post that meeting more and more evidence of what my friend who sends me this information calls the recolonization of Guyana.
Mm-hmm.
Our guy that works the warship that has come down, the American training, the position we took on the Security Council with, as regards the Houthis, this all shows a sign of some caving in to American and Western belligerents. So I feel that we have opened up a harness nest. And I feel my friend is correct in suggesting that at the wider level, entering a phase where Guyana is being more and more caught up in the web of global power politics. And I don't know if it's timely or really to our benefit to now find ourselves in the spotlight in the Security Council. So it has wider ramifications, as you can see.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So as an initial player in global politics, I shudder to think of the responsibilities that are now placed in us. Because I think one person wrote a letter in the local press saying he was utterly disgusted by the way that kind of voted on the Houthi matter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the ramifications of everything we do globally
Mm-hmm.
will now become more and more evident.
Yeah, but
We do need, and we should not have had to be in a position where, if we're moving into that role, we do so on the back foot.
yes, and I think that's the very important point there. That's a very important point, Professor. It's not as you would appreciate as a progressive, as someone who comes out of the left wing of our Caribbean politics. That in the face of Venezuelan aggression, the instinct among a lot of our people would be to try to get help from wherever it comes from.
Yeah.
But then, of course, that comes with the price of recolonization. It's not an easy situation to be in, and I think that's the point you're driving home. We should have, and perhaps we still have time to try not to give ourselves those two stark choices. Comment?
Yeah, I feel that you're absolutely correct. And that is why I personally feel that the government should do more consultation, but I maybe not want to say it. They need to have point of view that they will not themselves want to think of because they have to give as primary their immediate hold an office.
Mhm.
And we love to distinguish between office and power.
Yes.
And maybe a lack of imagination. Because this is not as if we became a member of the Security Council suddenly. This is something that was foretold months ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we should know that in any confrontation with Venezuela, that this will come up. The pressures will come up as we were talking about from the US and the UK. And the choices that we have to make have got to be thought out long before that. We cannot wait until they tell us that they're going to send our warship and hastily decide whether we accept it or not. We should anticipate that as part of the parcel of becoming a Security Council member. So I don't know if those evaluations have been done. And I usually like to suggest that the government should consult, partly because they may not think of things that the other parties might think of.
I think, yes,
And in terms of the national interest, I welcome that.
yeah,
I won't feel hostile to anybody telling me that.
yeah. And Professor, I remember being with you and in meetings, and you stressed the point that a government consulting doesn't bind that government to accept what you propose to them, but at least they consult and they hear another viewpoint.
Yeah.
And I remember you making that point over and over and over, because governments tend to start from the point of view that if they consult, you are
In the position.
yes, I mean binding them to it, and they clearly, maybe conveniently misunderstanding the meaning of consultation. But I think more and more we are moving into that era of our politics that consultation will become inevitable. Of course, the fight now is between consultation and a government who puts its survival in power as paramount. But I think, as in everything, as in life, in politics, some things become inevitable given the direction and the trajectory of the country and the world around it. Professor, before we go, budget is going to be read next week, Monday. 2 or 3 things that we should be looking for in that budget?
Fortunately, I don't like to spend too much time speculating on budget. And the reason for that is that I think since they have a certain date of coming, I think ours is the 15th.
Yes.
I prefer to spend the time waiting and spend the time cogitating because I have so many other things to do.
Right.
So I was at this point in time, all I've done so far is to read the statistics from the statistical section of the last budget, because it might have brought up issues that we discussed today in preparation for the next budget, which is coming out on Monday, and see where I might need tables to be carrying more data on them than the table inside the next budget would have. So I'll be sort of bringing those series up to date.
Professor, before we go, is there anything that you really wanted to say that I didn't ask?
No, I think you cover fear about the ground.
My friend Henry Jeffrey would say, after 1 hour of conversation, you still want me to say more. Professor Clive Thomas, always a pleasure to have you on and to share your perspectives. And
I'll see you tomorrow.
Yes, you will see me tomorrow. In another capacity, and of course, someone of your vast experience. We dare say it's more than perspective; it's wisdom. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, bye.
Professor Clive Thomas, they're certainly one of our institutions. After time, these people like that become institutions. They have so much information, so much experience. So it's wisdom. And I want to thank the brother who, the lecturer who wrote us, making the observations about the Rav Gonzalez issue that Professor Thomas referred to. I know I owe you a reply from another missive, and you are going to hear from me shortly. We did take your intervention seriously, as Professor Thomas would have intimated in his comments. So I know I don't always get to the feedback because the feedback is so much. I mean, literally, sometimes on a daily basis, I have dozens of feedback and I can't get to them. I don't have a secretary and so forth. And I don't get to all. Sometimes I see some of these comments and the feedback weeks after, you know. So I apologize. I really need help. And, you know, if there's any young person in the audience, well, I don't want to discriminate. But just to say, the younger people, the student types and so on, are the ones who tend to have a little bit more time. But if there are young people who would like to help with some of that kind of work, I would greatly appreciate it. I would greatly appreciate it, because we have to, you know, kind of divide our time. I have to do scheduling. I have to prepare for this program on a daily basis. I have to reach out to people, and there are things like the mails, the fee I can't get to. And on top of that, of course, you know, as we say, you know, I have my own, you know, 9 to 5 other job that I make a living doing, and that in itself takes up a lot of work. So, you know, if there are young people out there who are willing to, you know, I mean, help, I'd be grateful for that kind of help. People who are savvy with computers and designs and all those things, or somebody who can answer mails for me and so on, you know, I'll be more than grateful. I'm not looking for a secretary, you know, in that sense, but certainly someone who can help with, or not someone, but if there are more than one, I'd be most grateful who can help. There is somebody who has volunteered and is doing a great service in terms of the programs that I do in translating. A young brother who volunteered, and it's really a great service, and I want to thank him. It's that kind of assistance that I'd be more than grateful. And, you know, if persons would like to do it as an internship, we can arrange that, and you know, as a professor, you know, it doing it as an internship becomes easier, becomes very easy, because as a professor we can have interns. So if there are any of you in the audience who would like to help me with some of the workload, I'd be most grateful. Even if you can do it and you have you know, a younger, you know, child, niece, nephew, I will be most grateful for help. And like I said, we can do it as a kind of internship, you know. So think about it, those of you who are in the audience, and be more grateful. Thank you all very much. Tomorrow night we're going to have Dr. Vincent Adams here, and I'm trying to get Pato, David Patterson, to come on. I hope I can get him. And if we can get him along with Dr. Adams, tomorrow it's going to be quite an exciting program. Again, thank you all very much. Thanks, Professor Thomas, for sharing with us tonight. See you all tomorrow night.